Welcome back to the Meeple Marathon and another full and honest review, this time of Cloudspire. More specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the solo scenarios for Cloudspire in today's video. I'm going to talk about the things that I was not a fan of, things that I had mixed feelings about or I feel like could use a little bit more work, and of course the things that I love about Cloudspire specifically for solo play. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Cloudspire, it is a kind of MOBA-inspired tower defense game where you're essentially queuing up minions who are going to march autonomously towards the opposing faction's fortress gate and try and knock it down. All the while, at some point, you're going to meet in the middle. You have heroes on either side who you have a lot more control over. But combat is very straightforward. I hit you for 2, you retaliate for 2. I hit you for 1, you retaliate for 2. When your health chips are gone, they're gone, and you play in as many waves as it takes to reduce the fortress, your opposing fortress gate to 0. Well, in the solo scenarios, you have AI factions who are, their waves are predetermined by the scenario, but you also have different win conditions, which I think are a kind of winning combination along with what Cloudspire is, and I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, but creates an entirely different type of game from playing multiplayer. So, let's talk about first what I'm not a huge fan of about the game. And the first one is the vagueness of the scenario-specific rules and or win conditions. The Cloudspire game itself is, I would say, medium to heavy on the weight scale. It's really quite straightforward, but there are a lot of rules. There are a lot of intricate little rules that you need to make sure you have. On top of it, each faction plays uniquely different than the other, and there are keywords coming out of the woodwork in this game, and Chip Theory Games does an excellent job of providing you with these really nice reference sheets for all of the landmark tokens and the market chips, and then each individual faction. So depending on what faction you're playing with, you just grab that specific reference sheet and you've got it all right there in front of you. But that being said, it already takes a certain amount of brain power to learn the game Cloudspire, and then on top of it, the solo rules tweak things just a little bit, but they were sometimes very vague in their, what the win conditions were. Sometimes I felt like, well, is that it? Is that all I have to do? And I'm gonna talk about those more specifically in a minute, but I felt like they could have gone a little bit more detail in, this is specifically what's supposed to be happening in this scenario, and this is specifically what you need to do to win. Sometimes they were just kind of overly simplistic in the way they displayed the scenarios and the win conditions. The other thing, and this holds true for both Cloudspire in solo mode and Cloudspire in multiplayer mode, and that's the choke points that inevitably your minions end up in, because there are certain paths created by the landmark map tiles that you lay down, and they have to follow the path. They can't just wander off on their own. That gives them a very linear direction to the opposing fortress gate. Well, inevitably, everybody's going to meet in the middle somewhere, and then neither side can move unless you have very specific keywords, and it creates these choke points where basically it's, whatever side is stronger comes out on top and then continues to march towards the gate. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of being the resolution of how the minions duke it out every single time, and I feel like that happens a lot in a lot of the scenarios, especially when there is just a single path or a single point that everybody has to cross through to get from one side of the map to the other. So that, though, however, is really the only few things that I can gripe about the game. So again, I feel like the solo scenarios could have been a little bit more specific about what they were trying to have you do in the scenario, win conditions, and what the scenario specific rules were. And I don't know how to fix it because of the autonomous nature of your minions and how they have to march along the path. If there was too much variety in the paths, then you guys would just wave to each other from the other side of the map, and then you'd just be destroying each other's fortress gate, and it would all last a single wave, and that wouldn't be very much fun either. So I'm not really sure what the answer is for the choke points, but it's just probably my least favorite part of each round, called the onslaught phase of every game. So let's talk about what I have mixed feelings of on the game. And the first one is the difficulty. Like I said before, the game is already leans toward being very difficult to learn. And especially when you're playing in these solo scenarios, you have to learn not only your faction, that by the end of the mini 4 scenario campaign, you're pretty well versed in your faction, but especially early on, you don't know the other factions as well, and you have to have a crash course in those factions to understand how best to go up against them and keep them from completely destroying your gate, all while completing your objectives. And to top it all off, these scenarios are not easy. They are definitely, I definitely probably lose 50% of the time. And really for me, that's more like I just start over. I get to the point where I realize I'm probably not going to be successful here, and I just reset everything. But that is how it works. The scenarios are connected via a storyline, but they are simply just one-off scenarios with a common story thread in between. So I'm not breaking anything by just resetting everything and starting over. So I definitely have my fair share of losses before I figure out the answer to the puzzle and then can move on. So I feel like it would be nice if it didn't feel like there was just one way to be successful in each scenario, but I feel like that's currently the way it is. I wish there was a little bit more wiggle room in how you could be successful, but right now the scenarios are very difficult. But at the same token, why I have mixed feelings about this is that when you are successful in a scenario, it is a great sense of accomplishment that you have figured out the puzzle and overcome that obstacle. The other one that I briefly touched on before is that some of the objectives in the solo scenarios just seem really weak, in my opinion. For example, one of the campaign that I played through most recently was using the Horizon's Wrath faction, which is one of the newest expansions for the game of the most recent Kickstarter. And the Horizon's Wrath have these swabby minions here, and they basically are worthless. They're cannon fodder. No pun intended there, because the Horizon's Wrath has cannons. But you essentially send them out specifically to kind of protect everyone else, to be cannon fodder, but also once they die, they can promote your other minions. So if you have, for example, a Corsair here who marches out, and then a Swabby who is protecting him, the Swabby dies, the Corsair all of a sudden gains a health and the keyword capture, which is huge in this game, and probably one of my favorite keywords to make use of as far as the Horizon's Wrath faction is concerned. But one of the scenario objectives was to simply deploy, which means utilize, and these guys don't cost any CP, which means they're free to deploy every single wave. The trick is that when they die, you have to pay 2 CP to get them back into your barracks. Otherwise, they are gone for the rest of the game. So, but to simply be successful in that objective, you simply had to deploy all 3 of your Swabbies in wave 1. Well, that's super easy. And yes, it becomes more of a challenge because a lot of times I only gained enough source to buy back 1 and probably lost the other 2 for the rest of the game. But technically, according to the rules of the solo scenarios, all I have to do is be successful in at least one objective and not fire off any of the loss conditions, which they're very specific in the loss conditions. Usually they're don't let a specific hero die, or don't let the Brannin faction get that from you, or something like that. They are not necessarily have the let your fortress gate get down to 0, which is the main loss condition when you play multiplayer. So for me, I'm sitting here thinking, well, wait a minute, I could just simply deploy these 3 in wave 1, which is super easy to do, no skill involved. I have now completed 1 objective in this scenario, which means I have successfully beaten this scenario. And as long as I don't meet any of the loss conditions, which I think for that one was, don't let Mistbane and Traxtail die. Well, fine, they can move. They're heroes. They can move wherever they want. I can march them out and then march them right back into my fort. Essentially, have no strategy whatsoever for the rest of the scenario. Play like utter, dog do, but still win. I just don't get it. I just did not really understand why some objectives were win condition objectives. I don't really have much else to say on that. So let's move into what I love about this game. And let's talk about the obvious here. This is a chip theory game. Production and the components are through the roof. The production quality of all of their games is, they are the bar. They have set the bar years ago and they continue to, raise that bar every time. Everything is either neoprene or these high quality, heavy heat pressed poker chips, essentially, which feel really nice to play with, really nice to stack and like pull your health out from under and slide along your neoprene, and the neoprene all fits together well. And the individual fortresses, which have spots for everything, and the artwork is amazing. Just the production value alone, if you are someone who appreciates high production value in games, and that is enough for you to give a game a try. Now, granted, these games are not cheap. High production value does come with a price, but if price is not an issue and high production value is something that you really appreciate in games, then this is definitely a game that you would want to check out, because the components are amazing. I love just physically playing with a chip theory game because it feels so good in your hands. It looks great on the table. It just tends in all directions as far as components are concerned. The next thing is that this essentially is a strategy puzzle game, especially with the solo scenarios, because you can even see what the AI faction is going to deploy every wave from the start of the scenario. So you know exactly what's coming, and you can sit here and analysis paralysis all day long, which is okay when you're playing solo, and you can literally count out, all right, if I stack my minions in this way, whoever's going to be the front is going to be slowing people down, and it'll take them this many turns to get to this choke point, and it'll take the AI that many turns. Well, that AI is first, and so they, do I put my minion with capture in the front and my gunner in the back with range and everything else? And you can sit here and you can almost play it out in your head and analyze everything to solve every scenario is one big puzzle, and then every individual wave is its own little puzzle that you have to solve to make the whole puzzle work. And that is a beautiful thing. It's not for everybody. It definitely exerts some brain power getting through these scenarios, especially successfully. But the fact that each solo scenario plays a little bit differently, the win conditions are a little bit different, the variety is there, it uses your brain power a little bit different each time. And again, it is a type of game I really appreciate. So if you really appreciate a game that you can analyze outright and set everything up from the beginning, and there are some, landmark chips are going to be flipped over and those are random, and spires firing is a roll of the dice and that's going to be random, but there's not a whole lot of randomness in the game. So you can get pretty close to knowing how successful you're going to be in a wave, especially against the AI, when you can see exactly what and how they're deploying their units. So the fact that this is a puzzle is one of the things I love about the game. The next thing is, and I've touched on this already, is that especially in the solo campaign, is the variety of the win conditions and the setups. When you play multiplayer, your win conditions are always the same, and your setup is always, the board always looks the same. You get to technically throw down the various map tiles so you can change the route a little bit, but essentially it's kind of a big O every time you play, or a big just circle if you always put one in the middle. Here, you know, the map tiles are laid out in very interesting ways every time, and you know, sometimes the win condition, you don't even have to go near the enemy fortress gate, which I think is just a brilliant way to really get 110% out of this game. If you purchase this game for simply the multiplayer because you love the MOBA style, you love the tower defense, you love the asynchronous nature of the factions, and you love going head to head with your roommate or neighbor or whoever, and you've never tried the solo scenarios, you are missing out on at least 50% of your game, because the solo scenarios are going to play very differently than the multiplayer, and you know, they're really stretching their legs when they put the solo scenario content out there. So the last thing that I want to talk about, and it's something that they did not have to do. They could have easily created these kind of one-off scenarios where each faction that you play with goes up individually against each opposing faction in order. But what they have done here, and specifically, I'm going to hold up here my Ankar's Plunder, because on the most recent Kickstarter, I splurged for the nice hardcover book, and I love this thing so much. I am going to go back and buy the book. Everything that I need in that, the first book is in this book. I already have all the scenarios, but this book, with the way it lays flat, and just, you know, I feel like I am sitting down and reading a novel, because the stories that they have connecting the solo scenarios within each campaign are so well done and not necessary. I mean, this is all fluff, but it's beautiful fluff. And it really just immerses you in each scenario and the gameplay, and you know, sometimes very specific things you do in your solo scenario carry over into the next scenario, not in like game-breaking ways, but you know, just the simple fact that I don't want to spoil anything here, but like if you rescue a certain someone, you know, you basically, one scenario you're rescuing a certain someone, in the next scenario they're with you, and you know, they flow into the co-op scenarios too, and just the story, it's a very interesting world, and the stories are well done, the artwork is amazing, and I did not expect that. I did not expect to be so engrossed in the story each time, and they're not like little paragraphs, they're like 2 or 3 pages worth of these, you know, big hardback textbook sized books. 2 or 3 pages worth of story in between each scenario, and that is just so much of a bonus, really. So is this, you know, in line with like a Sleeping Gods type of storytelling game? No. I mean, it really, at the end of the day, it's just filler. The game itself is not about telling a story, but the fact that they have included it and connected these all together really just, again, stretches the legs of this content to, you know, an amazing level. So if you enjoy puzzle-like strategy games, if you enjoy a game where you can analyze everything from the beginning and be, I'd say, 85 to 90% successful, as long as you have thought it out beforehand, but also if you appreciate good component quality, these are all great reasons for you to check out Cloudspire, and or if you want some variety in your Cloudspire content and you haven't checked out the solo scenarios yet, please check them out. Chip Theory Games is doing amazing things here with their games, with their production quality, and in my opinion, Cloudspire is their top game. It is close between Too Many Bones and Cloudspire, but for me, I think that because the component quality is almost identical, you know, it's there for both games. The artwork is there for both games. The uniqueness of the factions versus the uniqueness of your characters that you play against is there for both games. But honestly, for me, the storylines that they have created for these factions and connected them in between these little mini campaigns outdoes the storylines that are kind of much more randomly put together when you play through a Too Many Bones campaign and you're just flipping over a random card. I think that that's giving Cloudspire the edge. So I'm just going to go out and say it, that right now in my collection, Cloudspire is my top Chip Theory game, which is, that's saying something, but don't get me wrong, Too Many Bones is also an amazing game. We're talking about a slight edge here, given to Cloudspire. So check them both out, in my opinion. Maybe someday I'll do a full and honest review of Too Many Bones. But for now, we are just talking about Cloudspire. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing to the channel. Once again, thanks for watching. Have a great day.